this whole idea of freedom of speech and this conversation is very important to me, and I'm glad to have you on to talk about it. So what started out as a neo-Nazi murder in Charlottesville and the president's failure to denounce Nazi and white supremacists exploded into a discussion in this country about the removal of Confederate statues. Have we gotten away from the point of what happened in Charlottesville, what it was really about?
And it seems to me we clearly have, and I think that was the point of the alt-right and the white supremacists seizing on an issue that they know that there's actually broad public consensus on not moving a lot of these statues. There's a Quinnipiac poll that came out today showing that 50 to 39 Americans aren't big on the idea of moving all these statues out. So they seized on an issue that they think is a winning issue for them and then tried to broaden out their appeal that way. And I think a lot of folks on the left fell for it. They want to have this discussion anyway, and so they saw the opportunity to have this discussion. But it seems like a misdirection from what actually happened in Charlottesville. The issue in Charlottesville is white supremacy, not whether some people think that statues should come down or stay up, because clearly 50% of the American population doesn't want to keep these statues up just because they're a bunch of white supremacist racists.
Did liberals get played by President Trump?
I think pretty clearly they definitely fell for what was, whether he plans it or not, a trap for the left. I mean, he said, you guys don't have a limiting principle. You're going to go after statues of George Washington or Christopher Columbus or Thomas Jefferson. And now you're seeing that actually happen on the left. The most obvious stupid case is this banning of this reporter from ESPN named Robert Lee, an Asian guy, from covering an event at University of Virginia. You know, the political correctness of the left is actually driving people into Trump's arms, even though Trump's initial response to Charlottesville and then his Tuesday response to Charlottesville was entirely wrong. I think that one thing that Trump has had, he's just benefited from the fact that the left is constantly reacting to everything he says with an enormous level of passion, and I think that that's actually a negative. Even what he did last night insofar as going after the media, because the media reacted, instead of doing objective analysis of where he was not telling the truth, they jumped to, extraordinary critiques of his mental health and talking about how he was crazy and how he was morally bereft and all this stuff. All that does is it plays to his crowd. His crowd thinks that the media is out to get him. His crowd thinks that the media have a particular emotional animus for him personally. And so anything that the media do is going to exacerbate that.
Well, two things. And by the way, just because ESPN, I want to get it correct. ESPN has responded, and they were saying they didn't ban the guy's name is Robert.
Yeah, they moved
Lee.
him off of it.
They didn't ban him. They asked him if he wanted to, and he picked something that was closer to his family. They said that they didn't ban him, and they were looking out for his own interest.
They're trying to take away our culture. They're trying to take away our history. And our weak leaders, they do it overnight.
The media is simply responding to people who are there protesting and to the story of the statues being taken down. The media hasn't called for the statues to be taken down. So I don't understand when he says the media is trying to take away your culture. What is...
Well, I mean, I do think that one of the conservative critiques of the media, and this has been true for as long as I've been alive and probably before that, is that the media have an agenda, a political agenda, and they hide behind this patina of objectivity in order to press forward this political agenda. Don, you were very passionate about President Trump's statements about the media last night, and I think some of that was justified, but I think a lot of it actually goes to what his base thinks, which is they think that you have an animus particularly for President Trump, that you have an animus for his agenda on things like Confederate statues. I think you personally probably want to see these Confederate statues come down. I mean, is that true? I mean, I would assume you do.
Listen, I lived in the South for a long time, and to tell you the truth, I knew the statues were there. I was offended by the statues. Whether they should come down, I would leave it up to the individuals. But I do think that they are insulting to people, just as you would you want to see a statue of Hitler as a Jewish
No, I totally
person,
understand
right?
your point of view. The
would
point
you want
is
to
that
go
you have
to,
a point of
which
view,
I made
right?
earlier, would you want to go to, and listen, we shouldn't pretend that there's this fake objectivity. Everyone has a point of view. It doesn't mean that you're biased. And so, but just to get people to understand, as a Jewish person, you would not want to go to a Hitler high school. Well, that same effect, African Americans, that has the same effect. Robert E. Lee has the same effect on African Americans. And so, and also the Confederate flag. And so I think we have to be understanding of each other. It's not that I don't like the president or I have an agenda against the president. I'm simply speaking the truth as I see it.
Okay, so and I totally understand that, but what he's saying and what his people are hearing is he's saying essentially that you do have an agenda in terms of what you think, promulgating what you think about Confederate statues. You have a clear point of view on that. That's a perfectly acceptable and I think understandable point of view, but the implication is that you are an objective reporter who's actually propagating a point of view, whatever that point of view may be. I mean, you just said openly that you don't think that your point of view is biased, but your point of view clearly is biased.
But
I mean,
what I said about the president last night coming out of his speech had nothing to do with statues. I was talking about his behavior on stage, so that had nothing to do with that. Yeah.
Again, totally understood. But the way that it read is that you have a personal animus toward the president, and that's the way he wants to play it. So whether that's true or not, that's the way that a lot of his followers are going to take it.
I only have a personal animus towards ignorance when people don't know their history, whether that's the president of the United States, a guest on this show, or someone I speak to on the street. I think if you're going to be able to, you need to be able to defend yourself. And in order to defend yourself, in order to have a right, clear perspective, you need to know history and you need to be educated about it. And in many ways, I think people who are fighting for these issues are not. And that means the people who want to take the statues down and some of them who do not want to take the statues down as well.
As a matter of law, the legal question before the Senate, does it matter if there was a quid pro quo or not? And isn't it true that quid pro quos are often employed in foreign policy? And Professor Dershowitz rightly pointed out that we engage in quid pro quos all the time. That's not the question. The question is whether the president committed a high crime or misdemeanor, and if he's asking for investigation into possible corruption when there's real and credible evidence that there might be corruption, that is not an impeachable offense. Yes.
What evidence do you have that Vice President Biden used his position to benefit Hunter Biden's position on the board? Because that's what Democrats say, there is no evidence to that.
So,
part of your hypothetical question is
absolutely. So we have the best evidence of all, which is Vice President Joe Biden's own words. And we've seen the video, which if your publications have not aired the video, I think it's the most important video in this entire proceeding. It is the video of Joe Biden bragging. And he's proud of this, where he's bragging that he told the president of Ukraine, number one, that he would block $1 billion in foreign aid, American loan guarantees to Ukraine, unless and until he fired the prosecutor who was investigating Burisma. And Joe Biden ends that video. Let me finish the answer. Joe Biden ends that video with saying, and son of a bitch, he was fired. Now, Joe Biden is admitting,
but some would
and
say that Biden's actions made it that the corruption was actually looking into more, not less.
That could be, but I'll tell you one institution that didn't say that was the New York Times. The New York Times had reported just weeks earlier that prosecutor was investigating Burisma. And to be clear, look, the House managers have argued there was zero basis to investigate. When you got a guy being paid $1 million a year, and he doesn't know anything about oil and gas, he doesn't have any apparent involvement in Ukraine, that certainly raises the question of corruption. And Joe Biden was the point person for Ukraine. And when he got the prosecutor fired, that happened because, by the way, you want a quid pro quo. The one admitted quid pro quo is what Joe Biden admitted to on film. And that, at a minimum, provided a reasonable basis to say this ought to be investigated.
Senator, but it wasn't just Joe Biden who wanted the prosecutor fired. It was the UK, the EU, the IMF, the World Bank, and a whole bunch of our allies. Are you saying that they were all in on this scheme? And also, can you tell me how many members of ExxonMobil's board have oil and gas experience?
So let's take your question. Look, as far as I know, the UK, the IMF, and other players didn't have a son on the board getting paid $1 million a year. And when it comes to corruption, you know, it is really astonishing to see the House managers talk about cover-up, and at the same time go all in on being desperate to cover up any evidence of Burisma's and Hunter Biden's and Joe Biden's potential corruption. And you know, I saw as I was walking down here that Chuck Schumer, I saw as I was walking down here that Chuck Schumer had said to the press, well, I don't think the Republicans have the votes to call Hunter Biden. That really speaks volumes how desperate Democrats are to block Hunter Biden. Let me tell you, Chuck's wrong on that. I don't know if we will call additional witnesses in addition to the 17 witnesses who already testified in the House proceedings. I don't know on Friday if there will be 51 votes to call yet more witnesses. But I'm confident of this. if there are additional witnesses, if the Democrats get their wish to call John Bolton as the 18th witness in this matter, I am confident we're not going to do the kind of one-sided partisan show that the House did. We're going to be fair to both sides, which means if we call John Bolton, I promise you we're calling Hunter Biden too.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. The New York Times reporter that you mentioned earlier, his name's James Risen. Are you aware that James Risen completely contradicted what you're saying that he said, commenting on this article, that his words have been twisted, the 2015 article?
You know, it's not surprising to see the press engaged in situational ethics, and right now, one of the reasons that the American people, I think, have lost trust in a lot of the press is because so many of the press are desperately just repeating whatever the Democratic narrative is. The headline in that New York Times story talked about the vice president, his son, and prosecuting a corrupt Ukrainian company. And the New York Times reported the fact that the prosecutor was investigating Burisma. Now, I get today the media wants to pretend none of that existed, but if you look at Burisma, and by the way, Burisma was a company that was through and through corrupt. If you look at how Burisma was founded, the oligarch that founded Burisma was at the time the sitting energy minister of Ukraine. So he granted gas licenses to his own company and got incredibly rich through corruption. Now, why is that relevant? Because A, everybody knew Burisma was corrupt. This was common knowledge. It was such common knowledge that Chris Hines, the stepson of John Kerry, terminated doing business with Hunter Biden and with Devin Archer, his college roommate, because when they went on the board of Burisma and were taking $1 million apiece, he said it's unacceptable to work